Hello. Did you know that in biblical thinking, name equals authority, but name also equals fame? So, by obscuring the name of the Creator, Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's authority, and Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's fame. Let me show you. Jews have replaced the name of the Creator with Adonai, and even Hashem, while Christians have replaced the Creator's name with Lord. And how about Pan, Zoti, Her, Uram, Shoda Prabhu in other languages? Can you see the confusion? Do you see the interference? Therefore, in this video series, we will focus on the original Hebrew name of the Creator, Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. Numerous topics and arguments will be investigated and tested against authentic Hebrew manuscript evidence. Thanks to Justin, my son, who prepared these topics and who will also be presenting these topics. My name is Piet van Rensburg. Please visit us at HebrewGospels.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series on Nehemia Gordon and the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. This is session number 10, part B of Nehemia's 10 Rabbis, Cabbalism, and the origin of the vowel points. So remember, Nehemia did a study called 10 Rabbis that speak out on the name. And in this study, Nehemia brings 16 rabbis who talk about the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh, and he focuses on 10 of these, and these rabbis talk about the vowels Shua, Cholom, Kametz, and all kinds of supposed secrets about the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. So today, let's start with some video clips of Nehemia Gordon, where he talks about the 10 rabbis.
So we have this chorus of rabbis. We have what we call in Hebrew a minyan of rabbis, a quorum of 10, even 16 rabbis proclaiming that the name is Yehovah.
So these were the 10 rabbis who proclaim, they gather together in a minyan, in a prayer quorum, and they proclaim through their writings that the name is Yehovah.
Okay, so Nehemia Gordon is so excited about these 10 or 16 rabbis who all say that Yehovah is a sacred name. And many people think that these rabbis prove definitively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the original name of the Creator is Yehovah. However, in part A of this study, we started investigating and we looked at the authority of the rabbis versus the authority of the Hebrew Bible manuscripts. I've already shown you in sessions number 6 and 7 8 clear proofs from the Masoretic text that prove Yehovah is a gibberish pronunciation of the name with Adonai's vowels on the name. And I also mentioned to you last time that these evidences occur more than 1,100 times in the Hebrew Bible. So how could 10 or 16 rabbis possibly change the evidence, the overwhelming evidence in the Hebrew Bible manuscripts that say Yehovah is a gibberish pronunciation of the name, just like Yehovah? Okay, and that brought us to point number 2. If these rabbis contradict the manuscripts by saying that Yehovah is a sacred name, then why is it that they agree? Why do they agree? Why do they say that Yehovah is a sacred pronunciation of the name? And in part A, we covered rabbis 1 to 6. Today we want to cover rabbis 7 through 16. And we also want to look at point number 3, the vowel pointings. We're going to talk about that very quickly today, but we'll see that the foundational misunderstanding here for the name supposedly being Yehovah or Yehovah is that some rabbis and even some Karaites teach that the vowel pointings come from Moses. And so in the original Torah, they claim it was pointed as Yehovah and Yehovah. Okay, let's move on to some video clips of Nehemia Gordon, where he talks about pagan sources versus Jewish sources. Remember, why are we even looking at the writings of rabbis? Nehemia claims to be a Karaite. He does not believe in the authority of the rabbis. So why are we looking at the writings of the rabbis?
So last week, Michael, we talked about how scholars, and serious scholars, I'm not talking about, wackadoodles on Facebook, I'm talking about serious university scholars who are trying to understand how the name was pronounced, the name of the Father was pronounced in ancient times, will go to the depths of every pagan, magical, and Gnostic source, anybody but the Jews.
We saw that scholars ignore the Jewish sources. They'll look at every pagan and heathen source. Anybody but the Jews, just not the Jews. And then we saw 10 rabbis who proclaim that the name is Yehovah.
So Nehemia Gordon contrasts pagan sources with Jewish sources. And so the reason for looking at the writings of the rabbis is we don't want to look at pagan sources, magical sources, mystic sources, occult sources. We want to look at kosher Jewish sources. And Nehemia Gordon makes everyone think that when they learn from the rabbis to pronounce the name as Yehovah, they're getting away from paganism and they're getting back to kosher Jewish sources. Remember this quote. Nehemia says, let's look at Jewish sources. When scholars ignore Jewish sources, we also learned why scholars ignore Jewish sources, while they scour every pagan and heathen source to discover the pronunciation of God's name. So I understand the sentiment here, and I understand why so many people get excited and they think that when they pronounce the name as Yehovah, they're following kosher Jewish sources, they're not following pagan sources. However, in part A, we started investigating, and we saw that what Nehemia lists here as Rabbi number 1 is actually the Zohar, Tikkunei Zohar. And as Nehemia correctly pointed out, this book is the key book of Kabbalah. And we looked at this Zohar in some detail in part A, and we saw that this Zohar is a total mess. It is the Bible of Jewish occultism or mysticism called Kabbalah. It is a blasphemous book. It gives multiple erroneous pronunciations for the Tetragrammaton. In other words, the Zohar doesn't give us this one and only original pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. It gives many pronunciations of the Tetragrammaton with different sets of vowels on the name. By the way, this is a fraudulent book. It was written in the 13th century, but it pretends to have been written in the 2nd century. So the whole book is a lie and a forgery. And it used this key word chashak. This is the word that Nehemia brought to prove that the name is Yehovah, but he didn't show you that in the Zohar the same word is also used for the pronunciation Yehovah. So all of that covered in part A. Now, the scary thing is that Nehemia Gordon, although he claims to be a Karaite, and although he claims to reject Kabbalah, he turns right around and he claims that the teaching of this fraudulent book is powerful.
And what this passage in the Zohar means is that the vowels of the name are Yehovah. It's beautiful. It's so powerful. And what this passage in the Zohar means is that the vowels of the name are Yehovah. It's beautiful. It's so powerful.
So how is it possible that the teaching of such a fraudulent, blasphemous book of mysticism and occultism could be powerful? How is that possible? And as we saw in part A, not only is Nehemia's earliest and most original source here a Kabbalistic book, but we also saw that rabbis 2 through 6 were all Kabbalistic rabbis. And what does that mean? It means they all base their thinking on the Zohar, which is the Bible of the Kabbalists. They all learned from the same source and the same tradition which is based on this source. And so the first 6 rabbis were not 6 kosher Jewish sources. These were 6 Jewish sources that are pagan. These are 6 pagan Jewish sources based on mysticism and occultism. Now today we want to continue this study, and we'll start here with Rabbi number 7, Isaiah Horowitz. Why did he agree with these other rabbis that Yehovah is a sacred pronunciation of the name? Did he also follow this Kabbalistic tradition which comes from the Zohar, or did he have factual evidence to prove it? Why did he say that Yehovah is a sacred name? Let's start by looking at the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says that Isaiah Horowitz was a Kabbalist, Rabbi and author. At an early age, he accompanied his father to Poland and studied under Solomon Rabbi Lebushes in Krakow, and so Krakow becomes an important town in our study about the rabbis, Cabbalism, and the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. So he was a Kabbalistic rabbi. That means he based his thinking and his arguments on the Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar. Here's another quote. He was a rabbi, Kabbalist, and author. Horowitz was born in Prague but studied in Poland under distinguished Talmudists. Okay, let's move on to a video clip of Nehemia Gordon on Rabbi number 7.
Only in your fathers did Yehovah set his love, Chashak. He says, it is known, and it's interesting, up until now it's a secret. Now he says, it is known that the name Yehovah has the vowels Cholam, Shva, Kamatz, which form the acronym Chashak.
Okay, so let's have a look at this rabbi's claim here. Only in your fathers did Yehovah set his love, and this comes from Deuteronomy 10:15. Okay, if you go back to Deuteronomy 10:15 and you read this verse in context, it has nothing to do with pronouncing the name a certain way. This verse is used totally out of context. And you know why? Because it was used this way in the Zohar. This actually comes from the Zohar, even though Nehemia wants you to think this comes from Deuteronomy. To use this in the context of pronouncing the name a certain way comes from the Zohar. Then we can also look at this phrase, Cholam, Shwa, Kametz. Remember, that's in the wrong order. In the name Yodewah, it's first the Shwa, then the Cholam, then the Kametz. Shwa, Cholam, Kametz. So these vowels are in the wrong order, and that's again Kabbalistic influence, because Kabbalah is often based on imagination, and they make these things up and they imagine that Chashak supposedly means Cholam, Shwa, Kametz, and even though it's in the wrong order, they still believe it's true. Okay, and then you also see the key word here, Chashak, the acronym for Cholam, Shwa, Kametz. Remember, that comes from the Zohar. And also, let's read a little bit further here. Nehemia adds these 3 dots at the end of his quote, showing that he shortened up the quote. Let's read a little bit further. So this first phrase here, which formed the acronym Chashak, that's still part of Nehemia's quote. Look at the very next phrase. Tikkunei Zohar, Tikkun 69. This rabbi is telling us that he gets this information from Tikkunei Zohar, Tikkun 69. And that is the Tikkun, or the section, that we covered in part A. This section, Tikkun 69, gives multiple pronunciations for the Tetragrammaton as magic words. Remember, with Yehovah supposedly makes the wilderness tremble, and Yehovah supposedly shatters rocks and tears mountains apart, and so on. So it's a lot of mysticism and multiple pronunciations of the name. And this is where Rabbi 7 gets his information from. Now, let's read further. And so, because Yodewah loved you, that is the name that is in you, meaning that you are allowed to mention or pronounce it, that is Adonai, also pointed with Chashak. What is this rabbi saying? Let's just look at the same quote in Hebrew. You can see the key word Chashak there. You can see he says Tikkunei Zohar, Tikkun Samek Tet, which stands for 69. And he talks about Adonai, Gam Ken Nikud B'Chashak, also pointed with Chashak. Remember, Nehemia teaches that the vowels on the name are different, and they're not the same as Adonai's vowels. Rabbi 7 says Adonai is also pointed with Chashak. In other words, it's also pointed with a Cholam, a Shwa, and a Kametz. Now, here's the question. Is Rabbi 7 saying that we have the true vowels of the name on the name and also on Adonai, or is he saying that we've got Adonai's vowels placed on the name? What is he saying? Let's look at a different part of this rabbi's commentary. This is actually part of his commentary on the Torah. So we're going to a different section here where he also talks about the pronunciation of the name. And he says this, know that the name Yodewah has 2 pointings. mostly it is pointed Yodeh Waw Hei, Shwa Cholam Kametz, with the vowels of Adonai. Nehemia quotes this rabbi as if he proves the original name is Yehovah. This rabbi tells us in so many words, when the name is pointed with Shwa Cholam Kametz, those are the vowels of Adonai. Remember, to the Kabbalists, it's still a sacred name. Okay, sacred consonants, Yodeh Waw Hei, sacred vowels of Adonai, put them together, and you have a sacred name if you believe in Kabbalah. But he's not even saying that this is the original name. Let's read further. But at times the vowel is cherek under the waw, and then it is with the vowels of Elohim. Oh, so this rabbi knows we've got Adonai and Elohim's vowels on the name. And according to what is pointed, so we read it. Let's read further here. And behold, when it is pointed with the vowels of Elohim, it is with insight, as is known. So this rabbi actually says that the pronunciation Yehovah, or Elohim's vowels of the name, is something special, and it's with insight. But the name Yodeh Waw Hei, which is pointed with the vowels of Adonai, is a glory in his holy temple. Now, we can definitely learn something from the writings of this rabbi. Nehemia quotes some of these rabbis who say, in the temple the name was pronounced as Yehovah. And this is supposed to mean the original pronunciation is Yehovah. However, as you can see from Isaiah Horowitz, these Kabbalistic rabbis believed that pronouncing the name with Adonai's vowels, that's a glory in his holy temple. So when the rabbis talk about how it's pronounced the temple, they might just as well be talking about a nonsensical pronunciation, a gibberish name like this, with Adonai or Elohim's vowels on the name. It doesn't prove it's the original pronunciation. And this is what Yodeh Waw Hei will become Elohim for me means. That is, Yodeh Waw Hei pointed with the vowels of Elohim, which is the insight. So this rabbi is actually commenting on the phrase that Jacob said, then Yodeh Waw Hei will be my Elohim. But in Hebrew it literally says, then Yodeh Waw Hei will become Elohim for me. And this rabbi gives his Kabbalistic interpretation of what this means. And he says it means Yodeh Waw Hei pointed with Elohim's vowels, then you read it Elohim, and there Yodeh Waw Hei becomes Elohim. Can you see this is a lot of nonsense? And this rabbi tells us in so many words these are Adonai and Elohim's vowels. Why doesn't Nehemia show you this? Nehemia makes you think that this rabbi teaches that the original name is Yehovah. Nehemia makes you think that this rabbi agrees with him, whereas actually he disagrees with Nehemia Gordon. Let's just look at some phrases here in Hebrew. You can see here, Shva Cholam Kametz, Bin Kudat Adonai, Shva Cholam Kametz with the vowels of Adonai. He talks about Nikudat Elohim, the vowels of Elohim. And here we see Yodeh Waw Hei actually writes here Yod Dalet Waw Dalet, because remember the Kabbalists don't want to write Yod Hei Waw Hei in that order. So they'll either write Hei Waw Yod Hei, which is in the wrong order, or they'll write Yod Dalet Waw Dalet, or even Yod Kof Waw Kof. But it means Yodeh Waw Hei. Yodeh Waw Hei Hanikud Bin Kudat Adonai, which is pointed with the pointings of Adonai. Hu tiferet beheichal kodsho. It is a glory in his holy temple. Let's look at something else that we can learn from this rabbi. This is the rabbi who just said it is known that the name Yodeh Waw Hei has the pointings Cholam, Shwa, and Kametz. Now this rabbi talks about the secret of the Shwa and the secret of the Chirek. And this is why I call these supposed secrets. Because when these Kabbalistic rabbis talk about the secret of this or the secret of that, they're not talking about something that's hidden or unknown necessarily. They're talking about mystical interpretation. Let's look at some examples. Again he quotes, only in your fathers did Yodeh Waw Hei Chashak. And then he explains how the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, supposedly give the answer to the pronunciation of the name. Avraham, dot underneath dot, that is the secret of the Shwa. Is the Shua a secret? You can look at any manuscript or printed Bible with Tiberian pointings. Is the Shua missing? Is the Shua ever missing? The Shua is not a secret. What does this rabbi mean? This is the secret of the Shua. He's giving you a mystical interpretation behind the Shua. It's not saying the Shua is a special original vowel of the name. Then he says, Yitzchak. He comes up in the secret of the Chirek. Is the Chirek a secret? Look at any manuscript or printed Bible where we have Elohim's vowels on the name, and the Chirek is the E of Elohim, or of the gibberish pronunciation Yehovah. Is that Chirek ever missing? It's never missing. It's not a secret. So what does it mean when Kabbalistic rabbis say here's a secret of the vowels, here's the secret of the Chirek? They're talking about mystical interpretation. Not necessarily the true vowels or the hidden vowels or anything, but mystic interpretation. Yaakov with the secret of his names. Here the secret of Chashak Yahweh is explained, and also the secret of in you Chashak. And this is the mentions of Adonai. And this is the name that comes up in the book of the Zohar. Can you see? All these supposed secrets trace back to the book of the Zohar. Let's look at this in Hebrew. You can see the key word Chashak. He talks about Sod Shva, the secret of the Shva. Sod Chirek, the secret of the Chirek. He talks about Adonai. And this comes from Sefer HaZohar. That's an acronym there standing for Sefer HaZohar, the book of the Zohar. So it's very clear that this rabbi learns from his Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar. Remember this quote we had in part A. The early medieval Kabbalists wrote new mystical works culminating in the Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar. So here we have another Kabbalistic rabbi who learns from his Kabbalistic Bible, the fraudulent, blasphemous book of imagination, mysticism, and myth, the Zohar, and that is why he says that Yehovah is a sacred pronunciation of the name. So remember, Rabbi 7 knows we've got Adonai and Elohim's vowels on the name. Rabbi number 7 says that the name with Adonai's vowels is a glory in his holy temple. Rabbi number 7 calls the Shua and the Chirek a secret. And so this is a very good example of Kabbalism and all these supposed secrets, and actually this is nothing more than mysticism that comes from the Zohar. Let's move on to Rabbi number 8, Kalman Kalonymus Epstein of Krakow. Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Did he base his thinking on the Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar, or not? Why did he agree with these other rabbis that Yehovah is a sacred pronunciation of the name? Epstein's writings are replete with Kabbalistic references, and he seems familiar with the intricacies of the thinking of the Lurianic school. So the Lurianic school it's also called Lurianic Kabbalah. It means this rabbi was an expert in Lurianic Kabbalah, and his writings are full of Kabbalistic references. So he's a Kabbalistic rabbi. Here's another quote. Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Epstein was among the greatest rabbis that Chassidut has known. We'll talk more about Chassidut later today, but Chassidut is a religious movement within Judaism that teaches that Kabbalah is so holy and so authentic that it can even change the old laws of the Talmud. Interesting. Rabbi Kalonymus was an exceptional individual, a man educated in Torah and Kabbalah. He lived in Krakow. Now let's look at a video clip of Nehemia Gordon on Rabbi number 8.
The vowels of all love and truth are Shva Cholam Kamatz, as is known to those who know, which form the acronym Shachak. Remember, Shachak was the word for heaven that Menachem Tzioni had used. The vowels are Shva Cholam Kamatz. Those are the true vowels of the name. It's amazing. I love this.
As Nehemia correctly points out, this acronym Shachak comes from Menachem Tzioni. Who's Menachem Tzioni? He's rabbi number 2 on Nehemia's list. He's a Kabbalistic rabbi, And we covered in part A that he based his thinking and his arguments on the Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar, and now Rabbi number 8 again bases his argument on this key word of Menachem Tzioni. So can you see how these Kabbalists just follow each other, and ultimately they're following a mystic book, the Zohar. Remember, Kabbalah is not kosher Judaism. People might say, what's the difference? I don't care whether these rabbis were Kabbalistic or not. Kabbalah is actually pagan. As we saw in part A, the practical dimension of Kabbalah involves rituals for gaining and exercising power to effect change in our world and in the celestial worlds beyond ours. So the Kabbalists want to do magic. They want to do rituals to change the world and the universe. The true master of this art fulfills the human potential to be a co-creator with God. Does that sound familiar? Remember what the serpent said to Adam and Eve? If you do this thing that you're not supposed to do, if you eat of this tree that you're not supposed to eat of, your eyes will be opened and you'll be wise, you'll be like Elohim. It's the same lie that Kabbalah has to sell today. It also sounds like Satan, who said, I will be like the Most High. And so we see that Kabbalah is not kosher Judaism. Kabbalah is quite pagan. So Rabbi number 8, Kalman Kolomenus Epstein of Krakow, was a Kabbalistic rabbi. He based his thinking on Kabbalistic sources, which trace back to the Zohar, to the fraudulent, blasphemous, occult book of imagination, mysticism, and myth. It is the foundation for what all these rabbis are saying. Now, let's move on to Rabbi number 9, Samuel David Luzzatto. Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Did he base his thinking and his arguments on Kabbalah or on factual evidence? Let's see. Luzzatto's negative views on Kabbalah are found in his Vikuach al Chochmat HaKabbalah. Oh, so he was negative toward the Kabbalah, and he wrote a book expressing his negative views on Kabbalah. That's very interesting. It's the first rabbi on this list that seems to be negative toward Kabbalah. So we need to pay attention and really look at what this rabbi said. See whether he had any good arguments to prove that the name is Yehovah. Nehemia quotes this rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto in his article Cutting Through the Confusion on page 4. And this is what he says: had they intended to give the vowels of Adonai, why did they not vocalize the yod with chataf patach, also called chatef patach or compound shwa? Therefore I say that it is true they intended for the name to be read Adonai, but preserved with this its original vowels, which were known to them. How did they know? By received tradition. Let's first of all talk about the technical argument here. What this rabbi is saying is, because the name Yod-Heh is pointed with a simple shwa instead of a compound shwa, it proves the name is Yehovah, and those vowels do not belong to Adonai. That is the opposite of Hebrew grammar. It shows us how ignorant this Rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto was. He had no clue how grammar works in the best manuscripts in the world. We've covered this in session number 4. When the scribes put Elohim's vowels on the name, they changed this compound shwa on the aleph of Elohim into a simple shwa when they wrote these vowels on the name, because the yod is not a guttural and the aleph is a guttural. And this rabbi's argument shows us he didn't understand this. He didn't know this. If the simple shwa is supposed to prove that the name is Yehovah, why doesn't the simple shwa prove the name is Yehovi, as here with Elohim's vowels? It's a nonsensical argument, and yet Nehemia quotes this as if it is true. He quotes this in his article as if this is true. It's the opposite of truth. It's the opposite of grammar in the best manuscripts in the world. Okay, so what's going on here? Why does this rabbi really say that it's Yehovah? His conclusion is, no, it's known to them by received tradition that these are the true vowels. Whenever we get stuck in English, it's good to get back to the original Hebrew. Let's look at the original Hebrew manuscript that this rabbi wrote.
What's beautiful about Shaddal is, once again, we have the autograph. Here it is in Shaddal's original hand, and you can see here quite clearly. He says that the way it's vocalized in most places are the true vowels.
What a claim! The way it's vocalized in most places are the original vowels. How do we know whether this is true or not? Why does this rabbi claim that those are the original vowels? He says it's known to them by received tradition. So let's look at this manuscript that the rabbi wrote, and we're not going to look at the highlighted section there. We're going to go right down to the last sentence where he concludes. We're going to go down to the conclusion, and we're going to see, can we learn anything by looking at the original Hebrew that this rabbi wrote? He says, Lefichach omer ani, therefore I say, ki emet shehayeta kavanatam sheyikare bilshon adanut, that it is true that it was their intention that it should be read or pronounced with the language of lordship, meaning you should pronounce the name as Adonai. Aval, however, shamru imzeh kriyato ha'atzmit, they preserved with this its own pronunciation, its own reading, shehayeta yadua lahem, which was known to them. How did they know? Ba Kabbalah, by Kabbalah. Let's just zoom in so you can all see here. Beit, Kof, Beit, Lamed, Hey. Ba Kabbalah, by Kabbalah. It's known to them by Kabbalah that these are the true vowels. Now, if this rabbi wanted to say tradition, and he wanted to make sure that he's not talking about Kabbalah, that there's no misunderstanding, he's not talking about Kabbalah, he would have used a different word. He could have used, for instance, Masoret, passed down or handed down tradition. But he chooses to use Kabbalah because it is a Kabbalah tradition that Yehovah is a sacred name. This comes from Kabbalah. This rabbi's technical argument is ridiculous. And the bottom line here, literally the bottom line here is, it's by Kabbalah. So this rabbi claimed to be negative toward Kabbalah, but when it comes to the name, then he says, no, by Kabbalah, it's known to them, these are the true vowels. It's very similar to what Nehemia does. Nehemia claims to reject Kabbalah, and then he turns around and claims, no, Kabbalah is powerful, and it proves the name is Yehovah.
The first one I'm going to bring is from a book called the Tikkunei Zohar. The first rabbi is in the Zohar. Now, the Zohar is the key book of Kabbalah. And I have to tell you, as a Karaite Jew, I'm very reticent to deal with Kabbalah. They want to take a verse out of context and defying the rules of language and find symbolic meaning in it. That's one of the main pursuits of Kabbalah. I don't accept these symbolic meanings.
So Nehemia Gordon claims that he does not accept the symbolic meanings given in the Zohar. Then he turns right around and claims that the Zohar is powerful and proves the name is Yehovah.
And what this passage in the Zohar means is that the vowels of the name are Yehovah. It's beautiful. It's so powerful. And what this passage in the Zohar means is that the vowels of the name are Yehovah. It's beautiful. It's so powerful.
So as you can see, Nehemia turns right around and he says that the teaching of this Zohar is powerful. Now let's just go back to this quote where Nehemia quotes Rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto. Received tradition there is a literal translation of Kabbalah, because Kabbalah means receiving. And this is, by the way, how people will try to justify Kabbalah. They claim that Moses received these Kabbalistic traditions from the Most High, and he passed it on to Joshua, and Joshua received it from Moses, and so they just received it from the previous generation. That's the claim. However, it's quite clear here that because this rabbi chose to use the word Kabbalah, he meant Kabbalah. If Nehemia wanted to accurately translate here and help us to understand what's really going on here. Why does this rabbi really say that's Yehovah? This should read, they preserved with us its original vowels, which were known to them by Kabbalah. This rabbi chose to use the word Kabbalah and not a different word for tradition. And so, do you trust the Kabbalah tradition to give you the original vowels of the name? I don't trust the Kabbalah tradition with all its mysticism and myth and with its multiple pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton to give me the original vowels. I don't think that makes any sense. So, Rabbi number 9, Samuel David Luzzatto, although he claimed to be negative toward the Kabbalah, when it comes to the name, he says it's known to them by Kabbalah that the name is Yehovah. And remember, the Kabbalah tradition is based on a fraudulent, blasphemous, occult book of imagination, mysticism, and myth, the Zohar. Let's move on to Rabbi number 10, Jacob Bachrach. Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Can you see the pattern so far? Is anyone wanting to take a guess here? Do you think Rabbi 10 was a Kabbalistic rabbi? Let's see. And we'll start with the video clip of Nehemia Gordon on Rabbi number 10.
He writes as follows, and he's responding to the Adonai claim that the vowels of Yehovah are the vowels of Adonai. He says, if the vowels in the Tetragrammaton were indeed the vowels of Adonai, precision would have required putting a chat of patach under the yud for the aleph of Adonai.
So can you believe it? Rabbi number 10 uses this same nonsensical argument that Rabbi number 9 had used. Remember, we covered this in session number 4. Precision requires a simple shwa on the yod of Yod-He-Waw-He. Even though we've got a compound shwa on the aleph of Elohim, we have a compound shwa on the aleph of Adonai, precision requires a simple shwa on the yod of Yod-He-Waw-He for the vowels of Adonai and the vowels of Elohim. So now I'm wondering, maybe Rabbi 10 also said that the name is Yehovah based on Kabbalah rather than factual evidence, because his arguments don't work at all. Remember, Kabbalah is not kosher Judaism. Kabbalists take mainstream Judaism and mess with it, expanding, contracting, adding to it, and twisting it in different ways to supposedly shed light on it. This is what Rabbi Benjamin Shalva says. Remember, he's a rabbi, writer, yoga instructor, and meditation teacher. Yoga and meditation comes from Eastern pagan mystic religions, and it fits in perfectly with Kabbalah, because Kabbalah is mysticism. It's not truth, and it's not kosher Judaism. Now, let's start by looking at Jacob Bachrach's father, because obviously he would have been influenced by his father. And it says here in the Jewish Encyclopedia, Jacob Bachrach's father, who is called Yair Chaim ben Moses Samson Bachrach, was deeply immersed in Kabbalistic studies. While he was a believer in the Kabbalah and busied himself with gematria, he warned against giving oneself over to the study of Kabbalah or philosophy. So he did not reject Kabbalah. He was deeply immersed in Kabbalistic studies. Here's another quote. While he believed Kabbalah to be very holy, he maintained that it posed great theological danger. Although he discouraged in-depth study of the Kabbalah, he encouraged simple reading of the Zohar, and many of his writings contain Kabbalistic references. So Jacob Bachrach would have been encouraged by his father to read the Zohar. That's kind of interesting. Let's move on to Jacob Bachrach himself. He was a rabbi and grammarian. In 1858, he published his book Matrefa Avodah, which deals with a controversy over Hasidism, also called Hasidut, between Benjamin Wolf of Slonim, a disciple of Elijah ben Solomon Zalman, the Gaon of Vilna, and Joseph Bachi Roberto of Nemerov, a disciple of Levi Isaac of Berdichev. Now, lots of big names, but basically this book is a discussion or an argument between two people. The one is a disciple of the Vilna Gaon, The other is a disciple of Levi Isaac of Berdichev. So let's just talk about the Vilna Gaon. He was a Kabbalistic rabbi. Kabbalistic study was a central preoccupation to him. The Vilna Gaon had great respect for Luranic Kabbalah. And when we get to Rabbi 12, who turns out to be Levi Isaac of Berdichev, we'll see he was also a Kabbalistic rabbi. So this book is a discussion between two disciples of two Kabbalistic rabbis. Let's look at a more detailed description of Jacob Bachrach's book. It contains an alleged correspondence on the subject of Hasidism to understand how Hasidism could presume to change the old laws and to conform them to the rules of the Kabbalists, particularly of Isaac Luria. We'll see today that Lurianic Kabbalah is also based on the Zohar. Let's read further here. The answer follows with a detailed account of the relation of the Kabbalah to the Talmud and states how far the former, meaning Kabbalah, may claim to be authoritative even when in conflict with the Talmud. Joseph of Nemero then succeeds in convincing Benjamin completely of the truth of Hasidism. So Jacob Bachrach's book advocates that Hasidism is true and that Kabbalah is so holy and so authentic it can even change the laws in the Talmud. Can you believe that? Kabbalists take mainstream Judaism and mess with it. They expand, contract, and they add to it and they twist it. When we learn from Kabbalistic sources, we're not learning from kosher Jewish sources. We're learning from Jewish sources that have been messed with. Now, if you're still confused about Jacob Bachrach's book, it's an argument between two people. The one is a disciple of the Vilna Gaon, the other is a disciple of Levi Yitzchak. Both these rabbis were Kabbalistic. So then why did they clash and why did they argue? The Vilna Gaon, although he had great respect for Luranic Kabbalah, and although Kabbalistic study was a central preoccupation to him, he attempted to reconcile Luranic Kabbalah with the Talmud. Whereas Levi Yitzchak was a Hasidic rabbi, and Hasidism claims that Kabbalah can change the old laws of the Talmud. So this is why these two groups of people clashed. The one said, no, Kabbalah does not change the old laws. The other said, no, Kabbalah can change the old laws. And the interesting thing is that Jacob Bachrach's book advocates here for the more liberal side, saying that Kabbalah is so holy it can change the old laws. And remember, Kabbalah is quite pagan. Kabbalah is a kind of occult theosophy. Among Jewish rabbis, Kabbalah teaches the methods of interpretation for ascertaining these occult meanings. Now, Nehemia really likes to quote Rabbi Bachrach. This is probably Nehemia's favorite rabbi. So I want us to look at some of these quotes that Rabbi Bachrach said and how that Nehemia proclaims these to be true. He said, "This is not a caricative at all, and there's not a single vowel here that comes from or remains from as a memorial to the title Adonai or even hints at it." Rabbi Bachrach says there's not a single vowel in the name that even hints at Adonai. We covered this in some detail in session number 3. Can you see there the last two vowels on Adonai and on the name are exactly the same? Do they maybe hint at each other? Those two vowels are exactly the same. The first two vowels you see here, if you know nothing about Hebrew, you can see they look similar. They hint at each other. And it's the same in manuscript form. 2/3 of the vowels are exactly the same. 1/3 of these vowels hint at each other. So for Rabbi Jacob Bachrach to say there's not a single vowel in the name that hints at Adonai is a bold-faced lie. And yet Nehemia proclaims this bold-faced lie of Jacob Bachrach as if it is the truth.
And I read you the quote from the rabbi in 1896 who says there's no trace here of the vowels of Adonai. I think I read that. He says in 1896, Jacob Bachrach, he says there's no trace here of the word Adonai. These are the vowels that belong to the name of the Father alone and nothing else.
He goes on. The vowels Shvach Olam Kamatz specifically belong to the unique name alone. Meaning these aren't the vowels of Adonai. There is not a single vowel here that comes from or remains from a reference to the title Adonai, or even hints at it.
So can you see here that Nehemia proclaims Jacob Bachrach's bold-faced lie as if it is the truth? It's a lie to say that there is not a single vowel on the name that hints at Adonai. It's not at all true or accurate. Here's another quote by Rabbi Jacob Bachrach. The vowels of the unique name remain with it according to its own pronunciation, whereas the letters before it are vocalized according to the pronunciation of the title. So we covered this in some detail in session number 6. The argument is basically, we know, yes, in Ladonai, it's written this way, Ladonai, we have a line there underneath the lamed, which is an A, and so when this lamed preposition is attached to the name, it also has this line there. It also has the A there of Ladonai. This shows we've got Ladonai's vowels on the name. But no, this rabbi claims that the prefix vowel is the vowel of Adonai, but the rest of the vowels on the name are unchangeable. They remain with the unique name according to its own pronunciation. The name is Yehovah. This is again a very poor argument. It is not true, not in the B52 manuscript, neither in the Aleppo Codex. Let me show you one example here. Here the name is read as Elohim. In fact, it's read as Leilohim. We have the A of Leilohim on the prefix, and we have dummy vowels on the name. Can you see here? There we have a chirak. That's the E of Elohim. The vowels of the unique name do not remain with it according to its own pronunciation, but are changed according to the pronunciation of the title. When it's pronounced Elohim, we have Elohim's vowels on the name. When it's pronounced Adonai, we have Adonai's vowels on the name. So again, this rabbi uses a nonsensical argument that is not true, and Nehemia quotes this as if it is true. Remember, this was covered in detail in session number 6. Okay, so Rabbi number 10, Jacob Bachrach, was a Kabbalistic rabbi. His technical arguments are false and nonsensical, but he agrees with these other rabbis that Yehovah is a sacred name because he was Kabbalistic. Can you see here? Each and every one of these rabbis, of these 10 rabbis, based their thinking on Kabbalah. Even number 9, who claim to be negative toward the Kabbalah, says no, it's known to them by Kabbalah that these are the true vowels. So, what does this teach us? When we learn from the 10 rabbis, we're not learning from 10 independent, kosher, Jewish sources. We're learning from 10 dependent, pagan Jewish sources. Each of these is dependent on the Kabbalah tradition, which is based on the fraudulent, blasphemous, occult book, the Zohar. So we're right back into paganism and mysticism and magic when we learn from these Kabbalistic rabbis and their writings. Now, there are 6 more rabbis. Nehemia doesn't actually quote these rabbis in textual form in the study, 10 rabbis that speak out on the name, but he lists their names and their dates and also the names of their books. So we're going to look at these rabbis one by one and ask, why did they agree with the other rabbis that Yehovah is a sacred name? Did some of these also follow the Kabbalah tradition, or why did they agree? Let's start with Rabbi 11. Eliezer Ashkenazi, in his book Ma'aseh Hashem, was he Kabbalistic or not? And by the way, Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi died at Krakow, December 13, 1585. Ashkenazi's wife Rachel died at Krakow, April 3, 1593. So again, these people were linked to this town, Krakow. And this is quite interesting because 6 of the 16 rabbis are linked together to this one town. It's not as if they all lived there for all their life, but they are definitely linked together by this town. Rabbi number 4 quotes Asher Lemel of Krakow. Rabbi number 5 is Asher Lemel of Krakow. Rabbi number 6 is quoted by Asher Lemel of Krakow. Rabbi number 7 studied in Krakow. Rabbi 8 is Epstein of Krakow. Rabbi 11 was buried in Krakow. It seems this town was a real hotspot of this tradition, this Kabbalah tradition that Yehovah is a sacred name. When we look at Nehemia's map of the 16 rabbis, we see 14 balloons. What does that mean? It means either we've got 2 towns where 2 rabbis lived, or maybe there's 1 town where 3 rabbis lived, because altogether we need 16 rabbis. You can already see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 balloons in Poland. That one there is Krakow. 6 of the rabbis are linked together to this one town. But really, that's a bit of a sideline. 6 rabbis are linked together to this one town. So far, all 10 out of the 10 rabbis are linked together by this pagan tradition of Kabbalah, which is based on a fraudulent book. And that's even more interesting. Now, let's look at Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, Rabbi number 11. Was he Kabbalistic or not? Although educated by a fanciful Kabbalist and a fellow pupil of Moses Alshech, yet he was a student, if not a deep one, of philosophy and physics. It doesn't say he rejected Kabbalah, but he was more interested in philosophy and physics. And can you remember who Moses Alshech was? We covered him in part A. He is the rabbi who says, in the world to come it will be Yehovah, with the vowels of Elohim on the name. This Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi was educated by the same person. He was a fellow pupil of this Moses Alshech. So he would have had the same Kabbalah background. Let's look at some other quotes showing that this rabbi did not reject Kabbalah. A few gave mystical interpretations. For example, Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi in his book Maaseh Adonai, also called Maaseh Hashem. This is the same book Nehemia references. In this book, Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi gives mystical interpretations. Here's another quote under the heading Kabbalah. The mysticism of this time had a practical as well as a theoretical side. The ancient names were written down by the mystics of the Geonic period, and so Hai Gaon, in Eliezer Ashkenazi's collection, Ta'am Zekenim, page 56b, mentions a large number of such works, meaning Kabbalistic or mystic works, as existing in his time. The Sefer HaYashar, Charbah de Moshe, Razah Rabbah, Sod Torah, Hekalot Rabbati, and Hekalot Zutrati. These are Kabbalistic works mentioned by Hai Gaon and included in Eliezer Ashkenazi's collection. He collected the names of mystic works, of Kabbalistic works. That means he was a Kabbalistic rabbi. So Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi is no exception. He agrees with the other 10 rabbis because they learned from the same Bible. Not the real Bible, but the Kabbalah Bible, from the Zohar and from the Kabbalah tradition, which is based on that book. So let's move on to Rabbi number 12, Levi Yitzchak or Isaac of Berdichev or Berdichiv. These are alternative spellings. Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Did he base his thinking on Kabbalah? Anyone wants to take a guess? Can you see the pattern so far? Let's see. The spread of Hasidism. Hasidic Judaism eventually became the way of life of the majority of Jews in the Ukraine, Galicia, and central Poland. Remember, Krakow is just south of central Poland. Hasidism gradually branched out into 2 main divisions. The first of these divisions was directed by Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Remember, Hasidism believes or teaches that Kabbalah can change the old laws of the Talmud. Hasidic rabbis believe in the authenticity of Kabbalah. Here's another quote. A group of Hasidim pray at Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's gravesite. They honor and revere this rabbi as being an honored Hasidic rabbi. He's an honored Kabbalistic rabbi. One last quote here will make it very clear that Hasidism comes under the heading Kabbalah. This is from Sepharia.org, a Jewish website, and let's just read the quote first. From everything which the Zaddik sees, he derives the service of God. And if, heaven forbid, he sees a certain person desiring to perform a sin, the Zaddik takes from this desire the service of God. This is a quote by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. This is Hasidism, or Hasidic teaching, and you can see your Hasidism comes under the heading Kabbalah 7. This is part of Kabbalah. This rabbi was very obviously a Kabbalistic rabbi. So, Rabbi 12 was Kabbalistic too. It's no wonder he agrees with these other Kabbalistic rabbis that Yehovah is a sacred name. Let's go to Rabbi 13, Moshe Chaim Ephraim, in his book, Degel Machanei Ephraim. Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Let's see. Sepharia.org says that this book, Degel Machanei Ephraim, is a classic Hasidic work by Moshe Chaim Ephraim. So it's a classical Kabbalistic work, but not just Kabbalistic, it's Hasidic. Remember, Hasidism says Kabbalah can change the old laws. Let's look at a quote from this book, from Moshe Chaim's book. He says, "The language of the Zohar remedies the soul, even when one does not understand what it says at all." How's that for mysticism? When you read from a fraudulent, blasphemous book of imagination, mysticism and myth, and you don't understand it, it remedies your soul. Can you see here? Why does Moshe Chaim Ephraim say that Yehovah is a sacred name? Because he believes in the nonsense in the Zohar. That's why he agrees. The Zohar is the foundational work in the literature of Jewish mystical thought known as Kabbalah. It's a group of books which includes Tikkunei Zohar, including commentary on the mystical aspects as well as material on mysticism, mythical cosmogony, and mystical psychology. So this Zohar is about mysticism and myth, and this is what unites these rabbis together. Why do they all agree? Because they all believed in this book and in the tradition based on this book. Rabbi 13 was Kabbalistic too. How about Rabbi 14? Was he maybe a Kabbalistic rabbi too? Characteristic of Danzig is his warning not to study the Kabbalah before the age of maturity and before the study of the Talmudic rabbinic literature. He himself shows an acquaintance with the Kabbalah. So he knew what Kabbalah is, and he knew it was dangerous, and he warned people, don't study Kabbalah too early. This rabbi did not reject Kabbalah, as you can see from this quote. Danzig's earliest and most important text was Chayei Adam. That's the book Nehemia references. In addition to halachic rulings, it also includes ethical and even Kabbalistic teachings. Danzig's book, which Nehemia references, includes Kabbalistic teachings. Here's another quote. While in Prague, in fact, at the age of 18, Rabbi Danzig began to write his commentary on the Passover Haggadah, a work primarily based on Kabbalah. Is it any wonder, is it any surprise that Rabbi 14 agrees with these other rabbis in saying that Yehovah is a sacred name? It's not a surprise. They all learn from the same Bible, the Kabbalah Bible. How about Rabbi 15? Rabbi Benjamin Blech in his book, The Secret of Hebrew Words. I think that's already a clue there. Secret. When rabbis talk about secrets, most of the time they're talking about Kabbalistic mystical interpretation. So let's see. Secrets of Rabbi Benjamin Blech. Blech demonstrates by Kabbalah so and so and so. He gives Kabbalistic interpretations. Here you can see page 1 of the book that Nehemia references. Page 1 of this rabbi's book quotes not the Bible, but the Zohar on Leviticus, section 73. Why did this rabbi agree with the others that Yehovah is a sacred name? Because he read the same Bible. Not the true Bible, but the Kabbalistic Bible, the Zohar. How about rabbi number 16, Ovadia Yosef? Was he a Kabbalistic rabbi? Did he base his thinking on Kabbalah? Or did he have factual evidence to prove that the name is Yehovah? Let's see. Yosef was sometimes willing to accept rulings which rely on the rulings of the Arizal. What is the Arizal? It's the writings of Isaac Luria, and we'll talk about him just now, but he was a Kabbalist. Nevertheless, in many cases, he came out strongly against the rulings, saying, "We have no business with mysticism," and rejecting rulings based upon the Zohar and the Kabbalah more generally. Okay, now let's just talk about this Ari. This person, Isaac Luria, also called the Ari, and I want to show you that he was actually inspired by the Zohar to do his mysticism. Isaac Luria was the founder of modern Lurian Kabbalah. When about 22 years old, becoming engrossed with the study of the Zohar, he adopted the life of a hermit. For 7 years he secluded himself, giving himself up entirely to meditation. This is what happened when Isaac Luria studied the Zohar. So some people are going to tell you that Lurian Kabbalah is nonsense, but the Zohar is true. Lurian Kabbalah was inspired by the Zohar. The only difference is that in the Zohar, it's not so blatant. And you need to put 2 and 2 together, as we did in the previous session, to see it's about magic. In Lurian Kabbalah, it's blatant. They're doing magic. One of his works was brought to Europe and was published. In this work are expounded both the speculative Kabbalah, based on the Zohar, and the practical or miraculous Kabbalah. So, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was sometimes willing to accept rulings which come from Isaac Luria, from this Kabbalist, and at other times he said, "We have no business with mysticism." So this rabbi is on both sides of the fence. He both accepts Kabbalah and rejects Kabbalah. Look at this quote. In order to succeed, Rav Ovadia at times turned against some of his own deepest principles. For instance, by using popular Kabbalah for electoral gain. This rabbi would use popular Kabbalah to get more people to vote for him. Let's look at one example where this rabbi taught Kabbalistic mysticism, and this will make it very clear that this rabbi was a Kabbalistic rabbi. He says, the 6 million Holocaust victims were reincarnations of the souls of sinners, people who transgressed and did all sorts of things which should not be done. They had been reincarnated in order to atone. How's that for mysticism? This rabbi was a mystic. He believed in reincarnation. He was a Kabbalistic rabbi. If this rabbi could go along with reincarnation, how much more easily could he go along with the Kabbalistic tradition which says that Yehovah is a sacred name? It's no surprise that another Kabbalistic rabbi would agree with the Kabbalistic Bible and the Kabbalah tradition that Yehovah is a sacred name. So not only are rabbis 1 through 10 all Kabbalistic, except for number 9 who says it's by Kabbalah that they know these are the true vowels, but rabbis 11 through 16 are also all Kabbalistic rabbis. So what this teaches us is, if we learn from these 16 rabbis to pronounce the name as Yehovah, we're not learning from 16 independent kosher Jewish sources, we're learning from 16 dependent pagan Jewish sources. Rabbis 2 through 16 learned from the Zohar and Kabbalah, and Rabbi 1 is the Zohar. The Zohar is the Bible of the Kabbalists. It is a book of imagination, mysticism, magic, and myth. And that is why these rabbis agree. They all followed this same pagan mystic tradition. And this brings us to point number 3, the origin of the vowel points. Are these vowel points from Moses? I want us to spend 5 minutes to identify this problem. I want to show you why the Kabbalistic tradition teaches that Yehovah and Yehovah are sacred names. It's because they claim that these vowel points come from Moses and that these vowel points are divinely inspired. Here's a quote from the Zohar saying, "The letters are the body and the vowel points the spirit." What does that mean? The literal meaning is, the letters are of course the consonants, and these are hard sounds like b, d, k, and so on. The vowels are sounds that are pronounced with air or with spirit, which is the same word. Okay, so the vowel points are the spirit. But the Zohar here says the vowel points are the spirit. They're claiming here that the biblical text cannot exist without vowel points. If you take away the vowel points, there's no spirit. They're basically saying that the vowel points are part of the inspired text of the Bible. Let's look at a longer quote which makes this very clear. And this is my literal translation from Aramaic. The Zohar says, "These points came forth from the secret mind," which is a euphemism for Elohim. They claim that Elohim inspired these vowel points. The vowel points come from the secret mind to establish the consonants in their order. And if you say the scribes instituted the points, hush and quiet, not allowed to say that. This shows us, by the way, that when the Zohar was written, there were people who said the scribes made the points. And the Zohar says, no, you're not allowed to say that. For even if all the prophets of the world were like Moses, who received the Torah from Mount Sinai, they would not have had the authority to change one small pointing in one consonant, even on the most insignificant consonant of the Torah. Remember, in the Zohar you need to put 2 and 2 together. What they're saying is, even if all the prophets were as great as Moses, they can't change one of the pointings in Moses' Torah. This means that when Moses received the Torah, it was pointed. That's what they're claiming. They're claiming that when Moses wrote the Torah, he vowel pointed it. These vowel points were inspired by Elohim, and no one else has the authority to change even one of these points. That's the claim of the Zohar. And remember, the Zohar is the foundational work for Kabbalah. Now, let me just show you Ginsburg's translation of this same passage. It's more of a paraphrase, but you can still get the same message. The vowel points proceeded forth from the same Holy Spirit which indited the sacred scriptures. And far be the thought to say that the scribes made the points, since even if all the prophets had been as great as Moses, who received the law direct from Sinai, they could not have had the authority to alter the smallest point in a single letter, though it be the most insignificant in the whole Bible. So although this is not a very accurate translation, it's a paraphrase, you can get the same message. No one has the authority to change the points in the Torah, even if they're as great as Moses. They're claiming that when Moses received the Torah, it was fully vowel pointed, because no one else can change it. This is not true. And in the next session, I want to bring you some evidence to show that this is not true. But for now, we can understand why Kabbalists believe that Yehovah and Yehovah are sacred names. Because when you look in the Torah, you see the name is sometimes pointed as Yehovah. And to the Kabbalists, that would mean that Moses wrote Yehovah. And if Moses did something, the Kabbalists believe in many different interpretations and hidden meanings, and so of course that's a sacred name. You know what? There are also some Karaites who claim that Moses wrote the vowel points into the Torah. How do they explain this one? Is the name Yehovah? This would also mean that Moses wrote Yehovah. If it's true that the vowel points come from Moses and no one has ever altered one of these points in the Torah, it would mean that Moses wrote Yehovah and Yehovah. And this is why the Kabbalists believe that these are two very important sacred pronunciations of the name, because Moses wrote this, black and white. We've already shown you this chart in session number 4. You can see here the big black characters are the consonants, these two blue characters are vowel signs, and then we have a timeline at the bottom. The consonants of the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Tanakh, were all written down BCE. Then the name was banned from being pronounced in the early centuries before and after the Common Era. We have a lot of evidence for this. And then, after the name was no longer pronounced publicly, they no longer pronounced the name when they read the Bible at synagogue, then the scribes added these vowel points to capture the traditional reading of the Bible. So in the next session I want to show you some evidence that prove the vowel points were not written down by Moses, neither by Ezra, neither did they exist at the time of Yeshua, but for now you can understand this is where the whole misunderstanding comes from. The whole misunderstanding of Yehovah and Yehovah supposedly being sacred names is based on this erroneous teaching in the Zohar saying that the secret mind, meaning Elohim, inspired these vowel points and that no one else can change these vowel points. No one can change them, meaning originally, the original copy of the Bible had these vowel points and that's the way it was written. That's the bottom line. That is why these Kabbalists are so confused to think that Yehovah and Yehovah are sacred names. Now, let's sum up. What did we learn in this two-part study? We learned that the Zohar is a fraudulent, blasphemous, occult book of imagination, mysticism, and myth. The Zohar gives multiple erroneous pronunciations for the Tetragrammaton. Yet many rabbis accept the authenticity and authority of the Zohar, and it's even called the Kabbalistic Bible. And then we saw that 15 out of the 16 rabbis were all Kabbalistic. That's why they agreed. It's only Rabbi number 9 who was negative toward Kabbalah. But when it comes to the name, he says it's known to them by Kabbalah that these are the true vowels. And this reminds us of Nehemia Gordon, who claims that he's so reticent to deal with Kabbalah. And then he turns right around, he claims Kabbalah is powerful, that the teaching of the Zohar is powerful, and he brings 15 Kabbalistic rabbis to prove that the name is Yehovah. Nehemia says pagan sources versus Jewish sources. Nehemia Gordon makes many people think that when they learn from the 10 rabbis and they pronounce the name as Yehovah, they're getting away from paganism, occultism, mysticism, magic, and all this pagan nonsense, and they're getting back to kosher Jewish sources. That is not true. All 16 rabbis trace back to Cabbalism. Cabbalism is Jewish occultism or mysticism. It's pagan. It's not authentic. If you want to call this authentic, it's authentic Jewish paganism. So when we learn from the 16 rabbis to pronounce the name as Yehovah, we're following pagan sources based upon mysticism and imagination. We're not following truth and we're not following the evidence. By the way, Nehemia completely misrepresented rabbis 5, 6, and 7 and made you think they teach the original name is Yehovah, whereas they really teach that the vowels on the name are Adonai's vowels, and it's only a sacred name to the Kabbalists with Adonai's vowels on the name. Rabbis number 9 and 10 use completely erroneous arguments and bold-faced lies, and Nehemia uses these arguments and these bold-faced lies to supposedly prove that the name is Yehovah? Is this ignorance or is this dishonesty? Does Nehemia not know that he misrepresented Rabbis 5, 6, and 7? Did he never read their writings in Hebrew? Or is he purposefully misrepresenting this? Did Nehemia never check the Hebrew Bible manuscripts to see whether the arguments of Rabbis 9 and 10 are true or false? Or is he using this anyway to prove the name is Yehovah? Did Nehemia never check to see that all 16 rabbis trace back to Kabbalah, which is pagan? Or is he hiding this information from you? Because if you watch Nehemia study 10 rabbis that speak out on the name, you'll think, okay, some of the rabbis are Kabbalistic and some of the rabbis are kosher. And you'll think that even the Kabbalistic and the non-Kabbalistic rabbis agree. But really, all these rabbis trace back to Cabbalism, and that is why they agreed. Because they all believed in a pagan tradition, which is based on a lie, on a fraudulent, blasphemous book of mysticism and myth. And that is why they agreed. And that is why they said that Yehovah is a sacred name. I hope you found this interesting. In the next session, we want to look at clear evidence that will prove that the vowel points do not come from Moses, neither from Ezra, neither did they exist in the time of Yeshua. Until then, Shalom and Yeshua Mashiach.